Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and if there was any lingering hope for the 2025 season, it's now all but gone. Resigned to the history books with little left but the post-mortem. Joining me tonight to dissect the corpse that is our season is George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben the Man. Good evening to our very faithful listeners. I've changed my mind. I was very appreciative that we haven't got a training facility at the moment, because otherwise the Melbourne supporters after that first quarter would have been out with the spray cans just like the Carlton ones were this week.
Just so crazy it could work not having a training base. It's a bit hard to pin us down at Casey. I mean, I'd go to Casey to make a point, but geez, it's a long way. So... Well, and what are you going to do at Gosh's paddock? Spray there's no wall in that shed there.
Yeah.
Well, Melbourne supporters are probably a bit too classy for spray paint. Maybe a splash of red wine is more up our alley. You've already heard him, but also joining us tonight, hopefully to provide us some comfort in this time of distress and sadness, is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And we sit here with mixed emotions as the great man Goody opened his pint at the beginning of his press conference. And as I said before we started, I'm pleased that the game was Saturday and I had another day to calm down, because I think I don't think the season is over. Our seasons are never over, really, as in that sense. It is in terms of finals, that's for sure. That's
what I was talking about. That's the main.
But I think there's a bit to take out of this game, and there's a few things to unpack. But it's just really hard to, that idea of mixed emotions that Goody said. I love the way when he talks in the royal we. It was we sit here with mixed emotions. He could just say, I sit here with mixed emotions, because there's no one sitting beside him. Well, there wasn't in the presser, but yeah, there was certainly a lot to like about the last three quarters, and I think that, as obviously the big thing is the first quarter, and we'll get into that, but there's a lot to like about the way we're playing footy in terms of the method that Goody's trying to implement. So there's things to take out of that game, but there's a fair bit to unpack about how we could dish up that first quarter. You must have been infuriated. You went, didn't you, Andy?
I was there, and I get what you're saying about the other three quarters, but I think that first quarter and that attitude, and we've seen it throughout the year, I think just trumps or it takes away from anything else for me. Particularly with the season on the line, but we'll get into that a bit later.
I mean,
but yes, frustrating.
Like, definitely more than a sour taste in the mouth, isn't it? Like, it was, But at least we're not Carlton, so we've got that.
Not yet. Wait till we play them in a few weeks.
Well, I don't know. They were insipid for the entire game, not just one quarter. So there's that. Did you watch the Casey game, George?
Yeah.
That was a bad doubleheader.
That was just as bad. And if people think there's a future,
wow,
you've only got to have seen that game.
Well, we don't want to read too much into a game that starts at 9:30 on the Gold Coast, but yeah, it's
half the day. Half the day's gone by that time.
Up in the Gold Coast, they do like to get up early in the sun. Did you go to that game as well, Andy? Or
I got there a bit late, sort of just as they were finishing up. So
so did the D's.
Yeah,
the seniors.
They got 5 minutes into the first quarter. Did you?
I got there before the first bounce, but I saw the tail end of it, and So, no, I didn't see it. But let's get into our housekeeping, because we've got lots to talk about. Each week, I invite our loyal listeners to support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we do appreciate that feedback. And as a token of our gratitude, we do give a well-deserved shout-out to those who do take the time to help us out by sharing their reviews. And Not a Cat Lady writes, a safe haven when the D's fans are doing your head in. Being a Melbourne supporter isn't always easy, and in the middle of a rough season, it can feel downright heartbreaking That's where the Demonland podcast comes in when the team's performance leaves me frustrated or deflated. Tuning into Andy, George, and Big Man brings a real sense of perspective and, honestly, comfort. They don't sugarcoat things, but they also don't wallow. They analyse what went wrong, explain things I wouldn't have picked up on myself, and remind me that there is a bigger picture. It's like a therapy session for Demon fans, smart, thoughtful, passionate, and grounded. Also love that they include questions and comments from the forum. It makes me feel like we're all in this together, sharing the highs and lows, even if we're not agreeing on everything. Thanks to the team for being steady voices through the chaos. Whether we're flying or floundering, the Demonland podcast is always worth a listen. Well, thank you for that great review, Not a Cat Lady, and I'm glad that you find our suffering cathartic and it helps you out a little bit. And keep that feedback coming. Simply leave a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we do give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you want to leave feedback or ask a question, share a comment for the show, you can do so under our weekly podcast post or just slide into our DMs. And you can download and listen to the Demonland podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. And in addition, you can watch and listen to us on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast and find our channel. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to connect with other passionate D's fans, come check out our forum at demonland.com. Sign up and join in on the conversation with fellow D supporters from across Australia and around the world. And it's completely free. And you can post questions or comments for the show, or you can just find and join in on the endless discussions about all things the Demons. Our chat room had some problems with our chat room. There was an update for it before the show and it broke the site and I was able to get it up and running. That's the site up and running, but not the chat room. So that's not available tonight. If you do want to connect with us, go and talk to us on the show live, go to demonland.com and you will see the link to Microsoft Teams where you'll be able to chat with us on the show if you choose to do so. I'll accept the call and just hang in there and I'll bring you in when there is a break in the conversation. If you do want to chat with us, the chat room, go to demonland.com and go to the podcast thread for tonight and we'll sort of monitor that one instead. We go live every Monday night at 8 p.m. So if you want to catch the show as it happens, head on over to demonland.com to tune in. Getting into the match overview, Melbourne's trip to Queensland, and mine as well, turned into a nightmare early, and despite a spirited fight back, the damage was already done by quarter time. The Demons slumped to a 19-point loss against a revitalised Gold Coast outfit, and these were undone by a diabolical opening term and 2 key concussion injuries. Fresh from the bye, Melbourne looked anything but refreshed in what Coach Simon Goodwin later labelled unacceptable. The Demons produced arguably their worst quarter of the season. They conceded 5 goals, 7 to a solitary point. Repeatedly were cut apart on transition and completely overrunning contested ball. Gold Coast dominated the inside 50s 22-6 and could have led by more had they been cleaner in front of goals. Melbourne's pressure was virtually non-existent in the first 30 minutes, a stark contrast to the Suns' high-intensity team-first approach. The likes of Rao, Miller and Noble hunted the ball ferociously, while Melbourne fumbled and failed to find any rhythm. From the second quarter, the Demons resembled something closer to the sides fans expected. Captain Max Scorn worked his way into an even ruck battle with Jared Witts, and alongside Jack Viney and Christian Petrarca began to wheel Melbourne back into the contest. Viney in particular brought the aggression that was sorely lacking early, throwing himself into the contest and setting the tone. Cozzy Pickett provided spark up forward with 3 goals and pressure acts, while Christian Petrarca surged through the middle, albeit with limited polish at times. Jake Melksham was the story of the day, though. The veteran forward, fresh off some injury setbacks that he's had and a form resurgence, slotted 5 goals, 6 in a performance that had everything but clean finishing. His presence was vital, and his second quarter burst kept Melbourne in the fight. The D's comeback hopes were further hampered by brutal luck on the injury front. Blake Howes and Harrison Petty were both subbed out before half-time with concussion, the latter following a sickening head clash in a contest with Braden Fiorini. The Demons were forced to reshuffle structurally, with Harry Sharp the sub and Petty's absence robbing Gawn of ruck support. Tempers flared late in the third quarter after a high shot from Stephen May on Ben Ainsworth sparked an all-in melee. The Suns capitalised on the ensuing chaos with a coast-to-coast goal that halted Melbourne's momentum just as they threatened a late charge. Despite winning the final term 5-1, the margin never dropped below 18 points. Melbourne's final tally of 12 goals, 13 told the story. Too much work to do too late and not enough efficiency. From midway through the third term to the final siren, the Demons kicked 5 goals, 9. A missed opportunity in a match that demanded perfection after their horror start. The match came off the back of some eyebrow-raising selection calls with Jake Lever, Jacob Van Rooyen and Caleb Windsor all dropped to the VFL. While it sent a message internally, it left Melbourne exposed structurally, particularly once Petty went down. Melbourne now sits 14th on the ladder with 5 wins, their finals hopes effectively extinguished, barring a miracle. For all the grit shown after quarter time, the club's inconsistency and inability to start games with intensity remains a glaring issue. Ben, you want to take away with your stats files?
Indeed. You got a bit of a croaky voice there, Andy, from a bit yelling at.
It's not even
clouds.
it's not even from the yelling. I've had a cold for like 2 weeks. So I don't. The only symptoms I've got now is just a bit of a croaky voice and some and a bit nasally. But yeah, enough about me.
Okay, the stats also, before I jump into why we lost and why I think we actually could have won it in the end and at least given ourselves a shot at it. Talk to the player ratings, which were really interesting for a few reasons. But so the top 5, what a game by Cozzy Pickett. Unbelievable game, really. He had 16.1 player rating points in the last quarter. Just unbelievable. I'd love to know if that'd be right up there for. You wouldn't get many quarters of footy with a player scoring that many. He started off terribly, negative 0.6 in the first quarter, ended up with what must be one of his top 4 or 5 scores, player ratings of all time in his career, 24.9. He was just unbelievable. And again, as I said, last couple of weeks, it's just awesome. It's just awesome that he's signed on. And, for 9 years, it's just he's just such an entertaining player to watch. I love watching him play. He was on the ground for 87% of the time. Massive. He wasn't the only one who had a poor first quarter. He had a massive game, though, in the end, 24.9. Just as I often say, 20 is considered an elite game of AFL football. The interesting thing was the drop-off. So the second-rated player, probably no surprise given, what did you say, kicked 5 goals, 7? Jake Melksham, did you say what his score was?
5-6.
5-6. He ended up with one huge quarter, a bit like Cos. He had his second quarter was 14.5 player ratings. He was our second highest, almost just a tick under half Cozzy's score. So Cozzy's player rating was 24.9. Jake Melksham came in at 12.7. Track next, 12.6. Bowie again continues his excellent form for the season, 11.8. And a player who's up for discussion tonight, I think there's a question about him. Colt had his best game for the season in terms of his player ratings. He was our 5th highest rated player at 10.8. Viney came in next. Probably the other one that I highlight is Maxi Gawn. He had 92% game time, so he was on the ground for a fair chunk of time, and he could only muster 9.5. And when I say only, that's not a shocking game of footy, but by his standards, his season average is up around 16 or something incredible. I thought I'd be interested in your thoughts, George, in terms of Witts. Witts played, I thought, was terrific, and it was a big factor in the win, and we couldn't get any sort of midfield dominance going. I'm not putting that at Maxi's feet, so to speak, but he didn't put it at the mid's feet, that's for sure. This one's an interesting one. Klas was directly below him, 9.1, and there's a question about the senior players later, and he had a frustrating game in some senses, and particularly in terms of some of his kicking decisions. And similar to Track, like he was our 3rd highest rated player, 12.6, but he sort of lost his hurt factor a fair bit, I reckon. And certainly his kicking is completely fallen away, and just the amount of times he's kicking for goal and he doesn't make the distance, or like that round the body kick, Track in his pomp in that last quarter, he nails that all day, every day. Down the bottom 4 players were bottom 5, Christian Salem, Xavier Lindsay, Blake Howes. No, you can't knock Blake Howes. He went off pretty early. I think it was at the beginning of the second quarter. Ed Langdon continued an average block of games for him. And then Harry Sharp was our lowest rated player. Xavier Lindsay, he didn't have much impact at all. So pretty easy why we lost. So why did we lose? I think, like we'll get into it, I guess, but we lost because of the first quarter, and we lost because of one thing, like they were banging on about it on the coverage. But, it's the case to say it's the worst, well, certainly our worst quarter of footy. What did you think live, Andy? Must have been dispiriting live.
It just, we couldn't do anything. We weren't getting it into we barely got it into the forward line. Particularly, we had the first inside 50, I think, and then didn't go there for probably 20 minutes. We couldn't touch the ball. Couldn't get two possessions strung together. It
was awful, wasn't it? And even that first inside 50 was early on, and Cozzy, he could have had a shot for goal at that point, but we just didn't look switched on. So I think there's a real big question about that first quarter. There's a question about the sort of training, and Goody mentioned it in the presser about the load that they did, and there's a bit to unpack there. But bottom line is we lost this game because our pressure in the first quarter, as you said, Andy, it's mathematically still a chance of making final post by. You'd think that we'd come out breathing fire. And I was worried within 2 minutes, like, oh my God, because, we were listless. Our pressure was 160, 180 is considered AFL average there. And I was quite confident I was very confident coming into this game, actually, because we match up really well. We've got a very, very similar game plan to them. It's very similar. Forward half, good ball movement, so I thought we were in good position to cause an upset. I mean, it's worth keeping in mind that, we were 380 or something to win that game. So it wasn't as if, it was a 50-50 match, but it just not acceptable. Like Goody said it, but just so infuriating, like watching it and knowing within a minute or two we weren't switched on. So that pressure, for me, that's where we lost it. Bang, right there, 160 to 209. It's negative 49 pressure points. It's almost unheard of. They could have put us to bed. They, if not for their inaccuracy, easily could have been 8 goals up at the end of the first quarter. We were lucky. A lot of those shots were very gettable. King missed a couple, I think, from memory. Easily could have been 40, 50 points down and probably deserved to be. It was such a listless performance. So for me, you don't need to go much beyond that for why we lost. We lost because we were, 37 points down at the end of the first quarter. It's sort of game over. I've often said that 30-point mark is...
We were still 8 goals down at the end of the third.
8 goals down, that's right, yeah. So from there, but although it was our kicking, we sort of in our accuracy. But yeah, that quarter was just not good enough. And so, it's a really interesting question is who's that's on, but a lot of it's on the senior players, I reckon. Of course, Goody, his role is getting them there. So, that's where we lost it. Our pressure was terrific after that for the rest of the game, but that's where we lost the game. That really one of the things is that they like getting it forward. We like getting it forward, as you said, Andy. Like we got the first inside 50, and I don't know how many after that because it was 23% in our forward half of that quarter. They were 77%.
22 to 6 in the first quarter.
23 to 6 inside 50s. Well, percentage-wise, we were 77% of that quarter. The ball was in their our defensive half. And as I said, it was dismal in that first quarter. The positive is that we did come back and we'll talk about that through, but I really sort of want to push back against the narrative like that they put the Q in the rack. They did not put the Q in the rack. And that's evidenced by their pressure rating. So their pressure rating was 209, 198, 189 and 166 in the last quarter. Almost identical pressure ratings and pattern as the game the previous week against the Giants, their previous loss. And I'll touch on that in a sec. So the other big factor, I thought Maxi had a really down game whether he just wasn't as influential as he has been. And he must have clunked I don't know how many contested marks he had, but we only took 5 for the match. They took 16 contested marks. We were down 11 for contested marks. They really went to town. Steve May, he looks a shadow of himself at the moment, doesn't he, in terms of his ability one-on-one. That was 16 contested marks to 11 down. There's a lot. I think for leaving aside that first quarter, you can't play 3 quarters of footy and expect to win a game of AFL footy. It was just simply not good enough, that the effort level in the first quarter. And that's why I like the pressure rating. It is, as I've said before, it's by far the most significant correlation between the pressure rating and sort of whether a team wins or loses. But I think this was a really big factor in their win, is that from centre bounce, they scored 4-1, so they were pretty lethal out of there. We were down 12 from scoring there, so we only scored 13 ourselves. And we're dead even for stoppage. It was a really curious game, actually. So not a huge amount. We only scored 42 points from our stoppages altogether, centre bounce and stoppages together, around the ground stoppages, and they so we're down 12. And it was really from the centre bounces, and they were really amazing. A lot of this was the first quarter, but through their attacking midfield chains, they scored 8 goal, 53 points in total from attacking midfield change for starting attacks from the midfield. And so for me, a combination of Max being off the boil a little bit, Witts being, I think, as George has noted before, I guess it's no surprise, but Goody. Maxi struggles against any of those, like Zeri and the really strong defenders who can really wrestle with Max, whether that, they blunted his sort of attack. But then, really, apart from Cos, there was no zip in the midfield. And, whilst Track was our second highest rated player, he didn't really have that sort of hurt factor out of the centre, and his kicking inside 50 just continues to get worse and worse, and is actually becoming a problem in terms of, because he's playing so much midfield time. I'm half thinking they need to play him up forward and be a permanent forward, because he's just not getting any, he's not doing any damage with those kicks inside 50, and nor is Oliver, nor is Clary as well. So, really looked very sort of one-paced, dull midfield this time, which was really disappointing. Scores from turnover was interesting, was 42 each team. So it's not like they smashed us on turnover, but 42 points is still too high. But why we could have won, like leaving aside that awful first quarter, there was definitely some positives to take out of this game. As I said, I really reject the narrative. That's not how footy works. That they put the cue in the rack. I just don't. I just don't, as I said, don't get me wrong, we're inexcusably poor in the first, and the Suns definitely should have buried us. Didn't because of their own inaccuracy. But, how many times have we said that about the Ds? A million times, where we should have won a game. But as I said, I reject the narrative that they put the cue in the rack or in cruise mode after that quarter, and if challenged could just click up and go up a gear. I just don't, if that was the case, it'd be reflected in the pressure stats, and it wasn't. And they were 209, 189, 189 in the third quarter, 15 more than us in that third quarter, and 166 to 170 in the last. But they were running out of puff, and they did exactly the same thing last week. It was really similar, those two games. We had that game had almost exactly the same pattern, both in terms of pressure, but also not quite the scoring, but very similar. So the Suns came out and blitzed the Giants in the first quarter in the same way that they did to us. They were up around 210, 215 for much of that quarter against the Giants, almost exactly the same. And then progressively, as the quarters went on, they dropped away exactly like this game. And, they blew the Giants away before, as I said, dropping each first quarter. But, if Melksham kicked his last shot at goal, the margin gets to 13 points. There was nearly 5 minutes. I think it was 4 minutes 30 from memory or something on the clock at that stage. We had all the momentum. If that goes through, we're well and truly, we're in that match. We're a chance of winning. And again, it's worth noting the comparison to the Suns game. The Suns were up the Sun Giants game, the Suns were 22 points up at 3/4 time, seemingly in control of that match. And they stopped all walk in that last quarter against the Giants, conceding 9 scoring shots, and they had 5 scoring shots. And apart from the margin, we were 45 points down, as George just noted, at 3/4 time. The numbers, both pressure but also that scoring pattern, were almost identical. We had 11 scoring shots in the last quarter, and against the Giants, 9. The Suns had 4 against the 5 the previous week. And as noted, we could have snatched it. The difference was, and this is really, this is the issue for us at the moment, full stop, really. When it's all said and done, it's as simple as this. The difference was we kicked 5-6 from our 11 scoring shots in the last quarter. The Giants kicked 8-1 in their from their 9 scoring shot in that last quarter. And that just shows the difference, I think, of their quality kicks. As I've noted a number of times, our best players are arguably our worst kicks, and that's a really, really bad combination. It wasn't such a bad combination in 21, but I'd argue our best players have dropped off their kicking since then considerably, Oliver and Track in particular. So again, we were woeful in the first, but I just think it's not helpful to fall into the trap of downplaying how well we played for the remainder of the match after that first quarter, as without sort of buying into the we sit here with mixed emotions. But Goody's right, that was. We didn't fold up our tent and go home like the Blues did. We toughed it out. I've seen hundreds of games where we've started like that and we've gone on to lose, literally 100 games, I reckon, where we've started like that and gone on to lose by 100 points. They're a bloody good team. We lost by 19 points. And I think it's particularly relevant and worth noting is that we were down Howes, I think, got injured at the beginning of the second quarter. So he was out for 3 quarters, one of our defenders, and a tall defender at that. And Petty was out before the end of the second quarter. So for more than a half of the match, we were down a tall defender, down a key forward, and therefore also down a full rotation for the rest of the game, which is really significant. They didn't even need to bring on their sub till halfway through. I think at the 20-minute mark of the last quarter, I think they brought their sub on. So,
and also Max didn't have a backup ruck, or certainly for not the same length
Jefferson,
of time.
the ball bugger, was in the ruck and looked all at sea. That's right, exactly. I mean, that was the risk of dropping JVR, but presumably Petty was going to be he took 2 or 3 rucks, so he was obviously going to be the backup ruck. So, I know it's really difficult. That first quarter was so dispiriting. I was beyond, it was more crossed over in just the full-on frustration as opposed to anger in that first quarter. But, let's not, as I said, throw out the baby with the bathwater in it and recognise the spirit for the boys getting back into it, not getting smashed up. That's what people complained about last year. Freo got hold of us. And a lot of teams got hold of us last year. Even this year when the Roos got hold of us, we fought it through to the line. As I said, if Melksham kicks that goal, 4.5 minutes left, we've got all the momentum. We're a chance of snatching it. It's a pity we didn't take our chances. So, lot to like, and one of the things I really like, and I really like for it not to be lost is how well we're moving the ball. And there's a question about that, so I'll answer that then. But yeah, for me, as I said, I'm glad the pod wasn't last night, but that first quarter was unacceptable. There's a lot. I think there's some big questions there about that first quarter. There's the questions around what's the role of the coaching staff getting up the team. There's also the question about players' professionalism and I think a big question about the sort of senior leaders around their sort of approach in that first quarter. But leaving that horror show of that first quarter aside, there was a hell of a lot to like about the last 3 quarters. And so as I said, I could name 100 games that I've seen where we've started like that and we've gone on to get completely and utterly spifflified. So I'm glad that didn't happen, at least.
All right. Well, let's get into our listeners' questions. El Diablo asks, who would you choose as our new coach if Goodwin goes? Do we go for someone young or more experienced? The writing's on the wall. Fab Demon says it's time for Goodwin to go. He and a number of other senior players seem satisfied with their 2021 premiership win and club legend status, and quite frankly lack any real hunger for more premierships. He's too close to too many players and at the same time has lost the team. The two propositions may seem at first contradictory, but they are not. We need someone fresh with new ideas, hungry for a premiership, and who can reset the relationship between players and coach. Doug Reamer adds, is Goodwin now deliberately coaching to save his job as compared to trying to develop our list? I had to listen to it today on SEN. The first quarter commentary sounded like an obituary piece. Once a coach starts coaching to save his job, it never ends well. They normally back in the old faithful at the cost of exciting new talent. This might be a tough 8 weeks. So, George, is the writing on the wall for the coach? And what are your thoughts now that the season, I think it's effectively over. B-Man's not too sure. What are your thoughts?
It's over in terms of finals.
Yeah.
But
the writing would be on the wall if we had a training facility, but we haven't got one, so there's nothing to write on. So
the writing will be on the wall when we get a CEO and a
president and a football department.
Yeah.
Just to answer LD Abelo's questions, there's not really any real proof either way about an older or a new coach. Supposedly a new coach brings in new ideas, so do older coaches. We know that when Paul Roos arrived at Melbourne, he brought in the ideas that he had up at Sydney, and that worked pretty well in terms of the transfer. Fagan up in Brisbane is another good example. Would you call him a new coach or an old coach? Well, he's an old person, but that was the first team that he'd actually coached. Pretty successful with that. I don't know whether the new coach's idea works. There's plenty of examples where it hasn't over the years. I feel for Adam Zuzay at Richmond at the moment. He's got a young, very young team that's not going anywhere for the next 5 years. What are they going to do with him if they continue in the same vein? We've had Ben Rutten and Reece Shaw in other clubs, David Noble, Stuart Dew, even at the Gold Coast. That didn't work all that well, but all of a sudden things are happening because they brought a hard weekend. So Carlton brought in Michael Voss after Brendan Bolton, wasn't it? Bolton was a new coach. That didn't work. Voss is an old coach. That didn't work. There's no real answer to this. So I don't know what's available. What you want is a coach who can look at the list that he has at that particular time and maximise it. In some cases, the list is not good enough, no matter whether you bring in a new coach or an old coach, and I think we're rapidly approaching that situation. I don't think Goodwin's deliberately coaching to save his job. I think the problem's more at the player level. I don't think our list is good enough. It's gone downhill since 2021. We'll talk more about that. We're 14th on the ladder at the moment. We were 14th last year. What's changed? The coach is still here. We've only added a couple of very, very good players to the list, but the trouble is that our list is ageing. They're 4 years older than what they were when they were at their best. They're not going to get any better than what they are at the moment. So the problem's not the coach. The problem's with the list. And when we talk about Casey, you'll see that there's not very much there to enthuse as well.
Just with all due respect to Doug Reamer, he definitely not coaching to save his job compared to trying to develop the list. I mean, he dropped Lever this week, and he's playing as I've pointed out, he's implementing a new method that he started doing that last year. Last year, if you asked him, he said as much as that you could make that case he was doing that more last year because he went to a more contested style in the last 6 or 7 games of last year, and in order to try and take advantage of the type of players that our best players are, which are grunt ball winners and sort of brutal, players. I think that's not the case that he's deliberate. As I agree with George, he's not deliberately coaching to save his job. He's shown admirable sort of strength of character, I reckon. There's a question up next, so we'll talk to it in a sec. But with implementing a game plan and doing that extremely effectively in terms of all of the way we're playing is the way the game is moving. I've got it'll be interesting thing. I've got a bit of a different take on our list, and I think, it's never as what's that saying? It's never as dark or something or other as, I think there's one of my big concern with the list, George, is the drop off in Petrarca and Clary and Lever and May, because that's not. The issue isn't that they're older. It's not like, there's plenty of examples at the moment, we've talked about it through the season, is that Collingwood's best players are their oldest players, except for Nick Dacos. Pendlebury in the top 5 of whatever their BNF is, side bottom would be up there, probably right up there with Nick Dacos. Pendlebury right up there. So, there's a lot of good older players playing at an elite level. I just think that Clary and Track he's been consistent, but he's just not got that game-winning ability that he had before his injury last year. I think he is struggling a little bit psychologically in terms of his attack on the ball, and Clary is, he's just not damaging in the way that he certainly was in 21.
Viney.
Yeah, Viney. I mean, Viney's playing. I mean, he got us back into this game to a degree. It was interesting that, we've been, people, including me, have said, let's try him forward, and that experiment lasted all of one quarter before they chucked him back in the middle, and he made a difference. But yeah, Viney. To me though, the bigger is Lever and Steve May. Steve May is getting beaten one-on-one in a way that he hasn't up until this point. So the drop-off for those players is real concern, I think. And
that's the difference between a premiership and not winning a premiership. We've got to decide whether we want to win a premiership or we're going to be middle of the road for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, but we've caught ourselves betwixt and between a bit. You can't really, the decision really was probably last year to trade out.
Yep.
I mean, I think going back to, there was a mistake made, not taking the advantage, not selling Petty at the high water mark. Getting head there, we would have got good value for him at that point. And they're the sort of decisions that you need to bite the bullet on, I think. But we might have lost I know there's a question about this too, but we might have missed the window a bit in terms of getting value out of, I reckon last year was the year to sell Track. Not sell him, but to trade him.
There was almost a mutiny on D Milan at even the thought of it.
Well, not from me. I was saying he wouldn't go. Don't worry about it. He'll go. But if
but make no mistake, other clubs will come hunting this year.
Yeah,
not for Track and not.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
Well,
especially when he said he wanted out last year.
Well, maybe. Then in which case, then I'd be open to getting value out of him.
Yep.
Well, we've got questions about that in a sec, so we'll get to that shortly. Well, let's move on to the next one. Doug Reamer asks, why don't we back in our club's own talent and strength? This year we're sacrificing our best winger, Langdon, as a tagger, and every week our most creative forward has to play undersized. Why not attack the game and try to win it rather than defend it from the outset? Lazy says the team just looks bang average, a shadow of the elite side that it once was. There was once a time when it was very hard to see holes in the list. Now, despite some good young talent, our list is quite unbalanced. We end up relying on guys like Jake Milksham to kick a winning score. We play future key forwards like JVR in the ruck, and we still have no competent backup for Max. Can we fix these issues in one trade period / draft? Realistically, how far away are we now from our next shot at success? Spirit of Norm Smith says the D's play a zone defence style game as they guard grass in between players. It's so frustrating. Clubs pick it apart. Lots of pointing, but no one manning up. A simple rule, pick up or at least get closer to your opponents. The Suns exposed it early until we tightened up and got into the match. Ditch the zone. B-Man, there's a bit to unpack there. In terms of, strategy, selection and playing style. So do your best.
Well, look, again, all due respect, I disagree with Doug Reamer, less so Lazy, because the team looks bang average and a shadow of elite side. I think that's pretty hard to argue with that right at the moment. And also around the zone defence, I disagree with Spirit of Norm Smith on that as well. And leaving aside the discussion about the list, okay, so that's can become the sort of foci, because I'm a huge believer fitness is a massive, as I've said a million times, is that I think beyond list, I think the most significant determinant of success is injury. Well, we've had a pretty good injury run. The next is fitness, and I don't think we're anywhere near the fitness of some of the elite teams going around at the moment. You look at Collingwood there, you don't need to be a sports scientist to see how well they cover the grounds. Ditto for Crows, by the way, who we play next week. And to a lesser extent, the Suns. Like, there's a gulf between those teams and us in terms of fitness. So,
and if anybody saw Sydney versus Footscray this week, there was two teams that just went goal for goal, just running furiously. I think they had 12 successive goals in the game. Great game to watch.
That was a great game to watch, wasn't it, George? But you know what was interesting? Fit, but it looked like the Dogs were fitter and they ran out that game better. But you're right. I totally agree with that. And so I think that, I think it's sort of a no-sum game sort of going down the track of our list as this, our list as that. There's lots of examples where, particularly if I'm right and our fitness is not where it's at, where it needs to be, then, we can be hard markers on that front. But leaving the list aside, the thing is that we are playing in a way that is really, really sort of forward thinking. It's the way the game is being played. There's a lot being made about, like this, the sort of comment from Doug Reamer around playing, sort of playing a boring style, or why not attack the game and try and win it and defend it from the outset? That's exactly what we've been doing. There's a new measure that Champion Data have created for the clubs as a way of measuring speed of ball movement, because speed of ball movement has become the most important factor in football. Leaving pressure aside, pressure is the most important factor. But in terms of method, pressure isn't really a method. It's just a sort of a non-negotiable if you want to win games of footy. But speed of ball movement is the most critical and most important element of footy game plan at the moment. And they've come up with a method to determine that. They've been working on it for ages, Champion Data, at the club's behest, it defines speed. It gives a speed rating in the same way that they do a pressure rating, which is actually it's one. If it's 200, it's actually 2.0. But in the same way, they've created a speed rating, which is made up of. Let's have a look. It's made up of time, how long it takes to distribute the ball once it gets in your hand. So how quickly do you play on after a mark, or when a player receives the ball? How much distance you take with every disposal. Doesn't matter whether that's forward or back. So every disposal, how much distance you take, and distance to goal, how much distance you take directly to goal with every disposal, is a way of measuring how well teams move the ball. And we are equal top in that measure behind the Cat. So it's the ladder of this speed thing. So is, again, made up of time, how long it takes you to get rid of the ball, distance, and distance to goal. This rating that they've come up with, Champion Data, 114 the Cats, Melbourne is 114. Western Bulldog is third. Suns are fourth. The other one that's interesting is Carlton are trying to do the same thing. They're fifth, then Lions and Crows. So, down the bottom end of the ladder is North and Richmond are second last, Fremantle are dead last, Essendon, Swans. So it isn't, obviously, the Collingwood are down near the bottom. They've got a different method. They, as I've talked about, they take a long time to move the ball, and once they do, they go fast. But Goody's sort of what, the question is, why aren't we playing attacking? Why not attack the game and try and win it from the outset? In the AFL, we are the fastest team in the AFL at playing on. All right, so on that number, in terms of time it takes to release the ball once you've received it, the rating is a bit funny, but 123 is that rating compared to, say, the Cats 115, right down to, say, North Melbourne 81. So we're playing. My point is that we are actually playing a really new style that is aggressive. It is attacking, and that's what my point about Goody is, that there's a lot that needs to be at least brought into people's assessment of where we're at. This is a radical change that this team is implementing. I think some of the senior players are really struggling to implement it. They've dropped off a little bit, but their strengths don't play to this model. The strengths of this model are foot speed, which is why I think they made some of the swaps they did. They wanted to get more leg speed in, although Windsor obviously contradicts that a little bit. But so we are playing a very attacking style. We are moving the ball really well. I can't remember if I mentioned in the stats file, in terms of points from defensive half, where season average is 26.8 points from the defensive half, which is moving the ball from the back half and the defensive half to the and scoring. We scored 44 points in this match for that stat. And then the other question that Norm Smith, Spirit of Norm, is, do these play zone defence that guard grass in between players? So for us, clubs pick it apart. They don't pick it apart. Our defence actually has been really good. Points from our back half in this game, they only scored 22 points. They were one of the best transition teams in the AFL. They only scored 22 points from the back half. The problem is that they smashed us in the front half. Like I said, they smashed us for inside 50s. What did you say it was in the first quarter, Andy?
22-6.
22-6 in that first quarter, and that's the similarity between Hardwick and Goodwin. They love to get it forward, and they smashed us through the midfield. They smashed us because Maxi was down, Track wasn't having an influence. As I said, Clary wasn't having it. He looks slow still, doesn't he, in terms of his ability to, anyone gets in front of him, it's like beep, beep, that player's gone. The only player who plays with a sort of touch of excitement at the moment in the midfield for us is Cos. So, there's a lot going right is what I'm sort of leading at. And we're defending actually the ground quite well in terms of our ability to stop teams transitioning. As I said, the Suns are one of the best. On a perfect day for footy, they could only score 22 points from their back half. The damage was done in the midfield, and that's not a zoning thing. That's their ability to get high quality looks from clearances. They did a really, really good. They were really excellent in that phase or that part of the game, Suns. So. As to the question, can we fix in one trade period draft? No, we can't. We've got to bring in players with high skills. We'll talk a bit about, we need players of high, with better foot skills. Wanganeen Miller, that's the sort of player we need to bring in. We need to look at players like, I would look at a player like Long from the Suns, who those medium small forwards. So that's who I think we need to be looking at. We need to be having a super high premium on quality kicks. Taylor's tried to do that. Seston is injured at the moment. Laurie can't get a game, but those players were picked because of their foot skills. So were Bowie. So was Bowie. So was Lindsay to a lesser extent. Langford. In terms of the question about Langdon, what are we back in our club's own talents and strength? That goes to my point, is that if we backed in our players' strengths, we would play a fully contested front half game of footy, make it a grunge 21, 22, 23 style, because that's where our strengths lie, unfortunately. Your Tracks, your Olivers, your Vineys, our three best, most senior midfielders, they're all grunts. They're all, they're all coalface players. If we were really going to play to our strengths, which was David from South Australia early in the season was arguing we should, that's what we do. We play that sort of territory contest down the line, long kicks, win the next contest type footy. That's what we're moving away from. And if you look at our balance between inside our time in forward half, it's almost 50-50 for the entire season, whereas in 21, 22, 23, it was 65-35 or 60-40 or, and so we're fundamentally changing the way we're playing and making really good strides at doing so. So, the list is one thing, so we can have that discussion and have that debate. But what's not up for debate, I think, is that we're implementing a game plan and it's clearly identifiable. And when we get it right, we're super exciting to watch, like we did at different times. The issue for us in this article, there was another article talking about this speed thing. Maybe it's the same one. Montagna was quoted as saying Melbourne are one of the best ball movements equal to the Cats in terms of our ability to move the ball from the back half. The problem is, as we all know, is our inability to hurt with our inside 50 kicks. And when we do finally get one inside 50 to a mark, our woeful inaccuracy. That's the issue. There's no other mystery to it, is that our kicks inside 50 are just terrible. I mentioned this stat ages ago in May that of all the players in the AFL with more than 50 kicks inside 50, the number of marks that a teammate took, Track was the worst in the AFL. That was mid-May, and I reckon he's gone backwards since then. I think, if I'm right in saying, I think it was only 2 from something like 50 kicks inside 50. He's kicking inside 50. It's got worse. And so it's really, our method's good. It's our inability to hit targets inside 50 and then kick goals when we do get a target inside 50.
Just a little bit more on the zoning. I think our poor selection this week really exposed the zone. When you're playing a zone defence, you need players who know where to go and what to do. When we dropped Lever, for whatever reason, I think we dropped Lever. Actually, having seen him at Casey, I think he's actually got an injury. He is not the player that he was. He cannot run.
Casey.
And we've got Stephen May, who I suspect has got something similar, if not the same. He simply can't move.
Lower back, maybe from his back thing last year.
And when you play a zone, you need players to come off their man at times. You need them to be on their man at times. And we were just horribly exposed in this game, and it was made worse when Howes went down. It was made worse when Howes went down,
but we weren't really that exposed. That's my point, is we weren't. But it was the first quarter when the damage was done.
Yeah, but the zoning doesn't work when you haven't got the right sort of players there in the first place. And the trouble is,
they did in this game. That's my point. That's what I'm saying.
They had 3 talls, and we went in with 2.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's a different question. But my point is that it wasn't an issue of the zoning not working. Our zones actually worked pretty well. It was 77% inside forward 50. They smashed us. The ball lived in the forward half. Yeah. No wonder, But you're right about the talls. That was an interesting decision around. And, I mean, Howes going really stuffed them around. Also Petty, because you could have taken Petty back there and swapped Petty and Disco, couldn't you? Yeah, but...
It also forced Rivers to go into defence to take Howell's role, basically.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
But he's been playing halfback flank mostly anyway.
Yeah. Big Gun says, with Petty now out next week, I think we're well and truly. I think it's well and truly time to give Jeffo and JVR multiple matches together in the forward line to see if they can find some form, confidence, and synergy. Must be so hard for them being constantly on rotation in and out of the team. When Petty returns, he can go back where I think he plays his best footy. Rostar says, although JVR hasn't shown much this season, he's shown us he's a much better backup ruck than Jeffo. What's the plan from here? Everyone always says blood the kids, but we already have been. With Petty and Howes out this week, here's what I'd like to see. Lever back in to take Howes' spot and JVR back in for Petty's spot. It would be good to see JVR and Jeffo together for a few weeks and see how that goes. Spirit of Norm Smith says we need to use these next 8 games to keep building the game plan and give more time to the kids. JVR, Jeffo, Colt, etc. George, time to bite the bullet and throw in the kids, or it sounds like you're not so enamoured with what's available at Casey?
Well, the thing is, we have been playing the kids. Yeah, People don't realise it yet.
Our 2 draft picks, number 1 and 2, have been
exactly,
playing every
game. And that tells you exactly where our list's at. The 2 kids who've 19 years of age have walked straight into the side and are staying there. But that's a separate matter. We will be playing JVR this week, and we will be playing Jeffo this week because we have no other options. That's just the fact of it at the moment. So they will be playing. Colt the same. We'll talk about the Casey game later on, but we are completely devoid of people who are pushing from below. There's a couple of interesting players down at at Casey. Are they ready? Probably not at the moment, but it'd be interesting because we haven't got anything to lose at this stage, and a couple of those players could well find themselves in the side. But yeah, Jeffo will definitely be in. JVR should definitely be in. The trouble is JVR did not impress at all at Casey this week, and
he's lost his. He's just not one grabbing him at all, is he, George?
No. But the other problem that we keep dancing around and not doing anything about is the second ruck. Geelong don't expect Cameron to go into the ruck, but we expect a JVR or a Jeffo to go into the ruck to replace Max. It's just ridiculous. Why don't we've got?
There's a pity AJ's injury came at a bad time, actually, as it turned out, didn't it?
Yeah, but we need to start biting the bullet and doing things about it. We'll talk about it later. I don't know what in the hell they were doing with Verrill down at Casey this week. I reckon he got 10 minutes in total in the ruck, so unless he was injured.
So after the game, so you wouldn't have seen this when the D's was sort of warming up. Verrill was with one of the trainers doing sort of run-throughs up and down. It looked like they were assessing whether there was some injury. It wasn't that he was doing it. At first I thought maybe, when they don't play a full game,
thought maybe he was injured.
They have to get the kilometres up, but it wasn't that. It was sort of sussing.
But from what I saw, he only played 10 minutes in the ruck in the whole game.
He must have got injured.
Yeah, and it wasn't at the start. So, I don't know what was going on, but, we've got to stop throwing these 19 and 20-year-old kids into the ruck when we've got someone like a Tom Campbell, for example, who did pretty well in the ruck at Casey. We've got to sacrifice a few things rather than sacrificing our future.
B-Man, anything you want to add before I move on?
No.
Okay. Wells 11 asks, is it time to start talking about the senior players and possibly trading them out while they still have any value? Well, B-Man, you've sort of alluded to this already. Do we need to make some tough decisions in the off-season, perhaps look to offload some senior players? But before you answer that, I might play this now. I've got your favourite person, Kingy, on the radio with Kane Corns about talking about perhaps a different role, playing the kids in the middle, guys like Langford and Lindsay, giving them more time, and then perhaps finding a new role for some of the more senior players. So have a listen to this.
It's sort of frustrating. I know they put Langford in for a couple of centre bounces in the first quarter, and I agree, those centre bounces didn't go their way. But you can't just put him in for two and then take him out. I think you have to give the kid a run of 15 in one given game to find out, to give them the experience more than anything. I don't understand what Melbourne are doing with some of the youngsters. I understand the tough love to Windsor. You've got to play harder, and he's been a bit banged up. But Lindsay and Langford are the future. Get them in the middle now.
And probably Rivers as well.
Rivers, McPhee, a lot of them.
So then the question is then, what do you do with the others that they've committed long-term to? So what do you do with just Petrarca just play forward for
end of year? Worry about that. Well, yeah, play forward. Yeah, play forward. Don't take up.
Then what do you do with Oliver and Viney? If they're not in the midfield, then they started Viney out, and it took a quarter for him to go. I thought he was impactful when he's actually having a real crack, Viney. But you can't have Petrarca, Oliver, and Viney there together. So then, and they can't play anywhere else other than Petrarca. So what do you do with those two in particular?
You prioritise the youngsters in the middle. It doesn't.
But haven't they prioritised these guys with the? These are their stars. These are their $1 million stars.
Viney can play on a wing. Why can't Oliver and Petrarca split 50% forward, 50% on ball? I don't care what Oliver does as a forward. I'm trying to get minutes into Langford and Lindsay on ball. That's my win for the day. And if Oliver kicks one goal or has a 2-goal game every 3 weeks, fantastic. That's a steal, right?
It's shifted, hasn't it, quickly for Melbourne?
Well, but you can still reset. You can still reset again in the off season. If you're not purging those players, if you're keeping them at your club, you can still go again next year. But you've got. We did this discussion last week. There's 1,000 minutes of footy left. You can't waste them. You got to punch as many minutes as you can to these kids to fast track their development. I've heard Sam Mitchell talk about this 60-game model for those youngsters at Hawthorn way back when, and look where they are now.
That's the first I've heard his voice in weeks, so it's
sorry,
he ruined my equilibrium. But, look, I tend to agree on one thing. in there is that I'd be playing Langford in the middle to get him into the game a little bit more. He's like at the moment, Lindsay. I don't think Lindsay is going to be a mid sort of inside mid anyway for a little while. Like I'd be keeping him on the wing. So I don't disagree with the other thing that I think is that I've found it a bit curious. Two things is I'm really curious why they haven't played track forward more. Like, in 21, 22, in 23, he was our best forward by a mile in terms of score involvement and impact on the game. And he seems to have been barely playing any forward this year. I'm not sure what the logic is behind that, but I'd definitely be wanting to see Langford get a bit more midfield time. McVee's an interesting one. I don't think, he seems to have struggled to come up a little bit from his injury. For me, there's a couple of factors. I talk about kicking all the time, and it's, the thing that I think is our biggest weakness. But I think I overemphasize a little bit. It's not just kicking; it's also decision making. And some of our decision making, is poor at times. And I put Clary in that case, and also Track to a lesser degree. I think Track is just going in terms of his sort of skill set seems to have dropped off. What I think Clary's a worry. One, the other big factor in footy around ball movement is leg speed. Leg speed's so important, and Clary is a disadvantage in terms of his leg speed. But the problem is for Claz is that he doesn't seem to have ever developed another string to his bow. He doesn't seem to be a player that can go forward and be like the way Powell Pepper would be a good example. He goes forward and doesn't look a natural forward, but is still impactful when he goes forward. Whereas I can hardly ever remember Clary going forward and being impactful. So for me, I'd be looking at just in the short term, I'd be looking at moving Petrarca forward more often, bringing Langford, I agree with David King, bringing Langford into the centre and giving him a good run. I don't know what the hell is he talking about, Viney on the wing. Pace is a problem. What are you going to do? Put out just about our slowest player on the wing? I can't, no thanks. And ditto for, I think for me, Lindsay looks every inch a winger. Like he looks like the absolute prototype winner. That's exactly where I'd keep him. Longer term, for me, is it time to start talking? Wells 11 asked about the senior players and possibly trading them out with a value. Well, to be perfectly frank, just before I answer that question, I've been thinking about something you said a while ago, George, and said a few times. So another thing I'm really surprised they haven't done is that I agree that we need another tall up forward, particularly when Rue's in the side. So is that why isn't Maxi pushing forward more often? He did a little tiny bit in this game.
Have you not seen the guy kick for goal besides the one he kicked? Besides
but
this
it's more about a contest.
It's about the threat that he brings.
Yeah, exactly. And I just don't understand why they haven't done more of that, pushed him forward as a genuine, he kicked it. That look went dead straight, that goal.
It was. I was closing my eyes, but he kicked it.
He was 2:13 before that, I think they said on the commentary. So
the best part was he didn't try and kick the leather off it. He just tried to kick it 20 metres and it went straight.
Perhaps he's been practicing, which we've been.
Now, JVR didn't play in this game, but I was reflecting, George, on what you were saying about that's what JVR needs is another big around him so that they take the heat off it, because I don't think JVR is going to be that. He's just not quite tall enough, but he's as tall as Tracy. He'll get there, JVR, but I agree that he needs another big around him. And why can't that be Maxi? I'd be pushing Track forward. But in terms of the question about is it time to bite the bullet, who's got trade value? Let's face it. Like May's not got trade value anymore, I don't think. Lever's not got trade value, not in terms of, being able to – it's that whole thing. I'll trade that player X who's not one of our best players and expect to get, the opposite.
First round pick, yeah.
Exactly. So the only player I think, to be perfectly honest, with trade value is probably with good trade value is Track. Right. And maybe then you look at players like Rivers and, I personally, I'd be looking at players who are average kicks. And, if I was playing hardball, I'd be looking at Rivers, trading Rivers because he's young and you might be able to get some good value from him. I would look at putting Track on the table if he's not. I've really liked his leadership elements. But he's lost his X factor a little bit. He has, hasn't. When's he really influenced? Dragged us over the line? this year. I mean, I'm probably being a bit tough on him. He's been probably arguably our best player for the season, so that maybe that's a bit unfair. But, that goal in the last quarter, by the way, we had two chances of scoring a goal before it.
Can I tell you, he never kicks those snaps or those ones when he's running. He just doesn't kick them. It's not damaging enough.
Well, he used to. 21, 22 he was. Yeah. And so he's just not having that impact. But to be honest, if you're gonna we've locked Cos away, thank God. If you really want to go to the trade table and get something value, you have to put up something of high quality. And
what do you think what would you get for him?
Oh, look, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I want Track the guy. I love him.
Yeah.
I think psychologically, to be honest, I don't know. He's not attacking the contest in the air the way he was. I don't think there's much really doubt about that. I don't know about what you fellas think about that. But, I think he's still showing some scars. I think it's worth remembering Langdon took ages to come up from his rib injury that he got against the Pies. He took like a full season, I reckon, to get back to his best. So Track could easily get back. Personally, I'd move heaven and earth to bring in Bergman, and from what I hear around the traps, he's in the frame. He's exactly what we need. Bergman's exactly what we need. He's got leg speed. He's a really excellent kick. He plays off the halfback flank, which is, halfback flank is the new sort of gun midfield role. That's he can move forward if need be. It would free Windsor to go up to the other wing. So Windsor on one wing, Lindsay on the other. So I'd be doing what it takes to get him in. I really hope we're in the frame for Jackson to come back because that solves that second ruck dilemma that George has spoken about, but it also provides a succession plan for Maxi. I think that would be huge. And the other player I'd target, I don't know what his contract's at, is Bergman is out of contract at year's end. I don't think we have the coin, but I'd love to get Wangadeen Miller. Wangadeen Miller and
won't get him. He's going to Adelaide. He comes from Adelaide. They've got the
but Bergman wants to come back from Adelaide, and so one of the talks around the trap is that a three-way trade is Bergman to Melbourne, Wangadeen Miller, and then we trade someone, maybe a Rivers to St Kilda, for instance, because. We've got to bring in better kicks. I think we're in the frame for Bergman. And the other player, as I said, I'd target if we could we get him out of the Suns is Long. I'd love Long and is exactly the sort of player.
Are you just throwing up things here, or is there anything to these things?
Well,
is this just
Bergman, I think, is a chance.
A wishing board or whatever it's called?
Yeah, look, really, to be honest, I'm just going off what I've sort of intuited from Demonland. I'm trying to sound vaguely authoritative, but Bergman wants to, apparently, his contract finishes. The talk
Bergman, our name has been, he's from Port. Our name has been touted with that, but there are a few other
and Wanganeen Miller, I have read on Demonland that Wanganeen Miller wants to go to South Australia, but they don't have anything. Bergman doesn't want to go to St Kilda, and so look, that's exactly the sort of player we need. And if that means trading out a track. Then some tough decisions. Realistically, who have we got that would attract reasonable trade in return? Leaving aside Track, you probably got McVie, who would be prepared to trade, and Rivers.
Yep. Yeah.
Back to the original problem that was highlighted. What do you do with Clary, and what do you do with Viney?
Well, I mean, Viney as a pressure forward until we can't, and then go. I hope that they don't abandon that. I mean, they tried in this game, and it wasn't his fault that the ball never got down to the forward line, did it?
Yeah.
So
but he's far too slow to be playing. You need a Cosy replacement.
Not as goal sneak, as a pressure sort of forward. He's not too slow.
No, he's slow. He's far too slow. Unless it's a contest.
If he's too slow for that role, he's too slow for every other role on the ground.
Yep, that's it. He's a grunt midfielder, and that's it.
Yeah, well, he can play grunt midfielder. midfield as a small forward, like pressure forward, not as a goal sneak. And I'd be playing track more forward more often. I've said this about Clary, the same thing, is that they should roll him forward and play him as a permanent. He's got the footy IQ, so I can't see why, why they don't try him at a sort of a half forward flank role of some sort, or a centre half forward even. Oliver, play him in that role, give him a crack at it. I don't know whether he's got the sort of
he doesn't mark overhead.
Doesn't mark overhead and doesn't kick accurately, but he'd fit right in down in our forward line.
Yeah.
But his lack of pace is a worry, isn't it? Because it gets exposed week in, week out. And I wonder whether, is there an extent to which Nathan Jones' role as midfield coach comes into, part of the discussion? Because in this game, structurally, we just got smashed structurally, I thought, and it was a massive part of the game.
Yep. All right, let's move on. Despicable Me says it's hard to tell because I'm so biased and invested in Melbourne, but I thought they weren't playing honest football. What's honest football? Well, I suppose it's when everyone is trying and invested and we all push together in the same direction. I watched Freo Saints on Sunday and really enjoyed the game. I think the Saints are coming on quite well. I don't see any of those signs with Melbourne. Rostar says it was another impotent first quarter. We missed the set shots that could give us momentum, and we handed back too easily. The DNA of this season feels all wrong. And Bucknaked says, when did we become such a group of downhill skiers? Where is the heart to really go at a contest, to take your turn and go hard? It shouldn't be Jack Viney to the middle or the quarter time spray before the boys get their heads over the pill. Biggest issue is somehow between our ears. Demon Cat says, Saturday was last chance saloon to have a chance of playing finals this year. And what do our players dish up in the first quarter? 5-7 to 0 as 1 point to have the game essentially dead and buried at quarter time. Unfortunately, I think our team has a serious mindset/attitude problem. Whether it's slow starts or poor kicking for goal when under pressure, it seems like the mental side of our game hasn't been 100% right since 2021. I mean, if the prospect of staying in the hunt for playing finals isn't enough to get this group up and about for the first bounce, I don't know what will. And that's incredibly concerning for the long-term future of the club. George, we seem to lack a bit of cohesion, and this week with our season on the line, we certainly didn't come out breathing fire and gave our opposition a 6-goal lead. Very concerning.
I like Bucknicked who identified Melbourne as downhill skiers. Very appropriate, isn't it, for what every other supporter in the competition thinks we are. I think every one of our posters there have made a very, very valid point. That the mental attitude to this game was simply unable to be understood by the fans, by just about everybody who was watching it. Even the commentators were commentating on the lack of, guts and determination, for want of a better word, that was being shown on the field by the club. I have got no idea, as some of our posters have pointed out. Everything was there for us. We've just come off a bye. We should be feeling rejuvenated. Here's an opportunity to show us something. We've come up against a club that has lost their last 3 games, that die in the last quarter, again, as we see with this. And what do? We come out
as perfect conditions as well, mind you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And, come out and in that first quarter, they kicked 5-7. If they'd kicked straight in that first quarter, we wouldn't be talking about making comebacks. I mean, the fact that we were still 8 goals down at 3-quarter time, everyone seems to have forgotten. But 5-7, they absolutely, utterly smashed us. And it was...
Mind you, we were murdered by the umpires, but...
of course, yeah. Okay.
They evened it up by the end.
How they could not play a reversal to Steve May, because at first I thought they were over-egging the pudding.
People at the ground...
On the replay, he put him down, didn't he?
Did they... someone at the ground, because we were watching the melee, but someone said it was reversed and then reversed again.
Oh, I didn't see that
in the
on
melee,
the
but we if they didn't say it on the commentary.
And then the fella Answorth, was it Answorth who kicked the goal? He ran about 40 metres without bouncing the ball. Fair dinkum.
I didn't even see that. I just heard the crowd roar, and I was like, "What happened?"
How could they play advantage? Like, how can he play on from that situation? He played on from 20 metres ahead of where the free kick was as well.
I think it was very smart from Ainsworth, apart from not bouncing the ball, but it tells you what in the hell you do ask questions about what in the hell the umpires are doing. Why are they even getting involved in the melee? Just let them fight it out if they want to fight it out. Throw the ball up or give them and play on. Ainsworth was smart enough to pick it up and go and play on. But the umpires are too busy watching all these other things instead of watching the game. So, but that's another question. I think it was more telling that one of the umpires elbowed Langdon in the head. He should be getting 2 weeks for that. If Lynch is going to get 4,
shouldn't Langford get in trouble for running into the umpire's elbow?
Not that was mentioned, but I think we were very lucky this week. I think there was a bit of nicety shown by the MRO because Jack Viney would have been cited for his tackle, I think.
Except, George, do you know what really pissed me off about that?
That's happened in the past. But
the commentators were absolutely ready to Shanghai Jack, because if you look at the replays, his head didn't hit the ground. He didn't not that a concrete head for Rao anyway, but it didn't hit the ground, did it?
Yeah, it hit the ground, and other players have been cited for that. But anyhow, let's not talk about the umpires. The problem is the players' mentality, and unfortunately, I think we're starting to see something that, for Demon fans that have been around long enough now, we've got a series of players who are playing for themselves, especially now that the season's out or dead.
But it wasn't playing
the team game
yet.
Yeah, but. I think we're starting. It shouldn't have been, but I think we're seeing players doing that, unfortunately.
But going back to the coach thing, has he lost the players? Has the coach lost the players?
The last 3 quarters would suggest not, but I mean, it's an interesting conversation. Like, is it the umpire? Is it the umpires? Is it whose responsibility is it to have the players ready? Now, where does the blame lie for that first quarter? Goody for not having the team ready psychologically, or the players? What do you boys reckon?
It's a bit of both, but
yeah. Unfortunately, it always falls on the coach.
Yeah,
we can't sack all the players.
But well, maybe we're getting to the point where we have to, or a good proportion of them. But yeah, there shouldn't be any excuse for professional footballers to be putting in a performance like that in that first quarter. There was just no effort.
That's where I land. I put the feet of the senior players. They're the ones who should be role modelling to the younger players what the minimum, expected standard is. And it was so dispiriting watching it. It was like, regardless of how well we might think, or I might think, that we played in the last 3 quarters, the first quarter left a bad taste for it was really just not good enough. And I mean, ironically, it was the senior players that got us back into it. It was Viney, and credit to Petty, who I thought he had his most impactful game until he got knocked out. He was one of the few players in that first quarter showing a real effort and grunt, I thought.
Well, the next 8 weeks will be interesting, because if they just drop in a heap, I'd like us to go down swinging at least.
The Bombers probably don't, given that they've got our first draft pick.
I know. Well, I don't want to give
We're
them
a death run club. Oh my God!
I'm happy to try and finish as high as we can just to deny.
Well, at least we're not Carlton.
All right. Well, this one's for you, big man, right up your alley. Doug Reamer says, Goulden said post-match that they put a load into the boys early in the week. He then said, we'll have a look at our program. Why are we loading when we had no realistic target come September? Sounds like they flogged them on the track post-bye, and that might be why we were flat. Howard Grimes replies, putting a load into the boys is completely different to the concept of loading in order to peak at a certain time of the year. Goody means that we trained hard, and there would have been a greater workload given we had almost an entire week without training, and this is simply in order to maintain fitness levels and be on for the next match. This is what happens when the loading topic becomes the topic. People get confused. So, big man, you're our loading expert. What are your thoughts on Goody's post-match comments, and do you agree with Doug Reamer or Howard Grimes?
Just taking Grimes' comment first. It's sort of half sort of right, but it's not like, it's the semantics to a degree is when Goody says, I just listened to that clip before, I hadn't listened to it, so I listened to it because I saw this question. They did a heavy block of training. That's the load that Goody was talking about, but that is loading, and it isn't in order to peak. Of course, like they weren't doing that, like to as Doug Reamer's suggestion. Why are we loading when we have no realistic sort of shot at September? But the point is, you're not doing it necessarily for September, is that you don't, as I've talked about a bazillion times, is week to week in AFL footy now, all they're doing is ticking over. So they've got two chances to, if you use the analogy of filling up a petrol tank. They fill up their tank at the beginning in the preseason. They hit round one, with a full tank of gas, and it depletes to the mid-bye. And this is all clubs do variations of this. Some now, as I've talked about during the season, the clubs are experimenting with different periods where they refill the tank, load, put in a loading thing. But the most common time to do it is around the bye, which is why if you look at the results, you get so many anomalous results at this time of year. Every single year for the last decade, you get crazy results at this time of year, because particularly since they started staggering the bye, which is ridiculous. They should bring it back to 1 week off. That's what's better for football, rather than this ridiculous 6 or 7 weeks in a row where teams are coming off byes, other teams aren't. It just creates all of these ridiculous, I think the AFL was the same with the umpiring. I think they like all the ridiculousness of it to sort of create this charade that a North Melbourne, every club can win a flag, any given Sunday type rubbish. The bye is the period that they have to do the loading. When else they can do it? So stretching that analogy, they use that bye period to put fuel back in the tank, regardless of whether you're going to play September, because if you don't do that, you're going to end up being completely out of gas come the last 3-4 rounds of the season. And what might have been a 3-goal loss is going to be a 65-point loss because you've completely run out of gas. So, it's a bit of a semantic thing, but they're definitely, of course, that's what they do during the bye. They're loading. There's no question. So Grimesy, when he says, the semantics is listening to the presser, is that it's right at the beginning, Andy, if you want to grab it. But Goody talks about putting a load into that they did a heavier block of physical training and tackling, and that's what they do during the bye. Is that they do heavier load of aerobic, a heavier load of strength. What was interesting though, and it's not in Doug Reamer's comments, is that Goody mentioned that he wanted to have more tackling and more physicality to get them sort of make sure that they were awake after the bye, and implied that it had the opposite effect. It would seem that they were, in fact, came out flat. What I really found interesting, though, was one, that Goody said it. Like, in years past, they just don't mention this stuff. And two, I found it fascinating that he said, we'll have to look at our program. He absolutely said that. And I think we need to look at our fitness program. So for all the talk about list, for all of the talk about game style, for all of the, is Goody the right coach going forward, one of the byproducts of there being such ridiculous level of sort of shallow analysis of the high performance programs at AFL clubs is that there's no dialogue in the media or even amongst fans, or there's no analysis or questioning of the fitness program. If I'm right and it's a incredibly important part of a football club, well, we should be debating it. And I thought it was really fascinating that Goody essentially put it on the table. He wasn't asked that. He gave that answer in response to what was the first quarter about. He could have said anything. He could have said, we didn't come up after a bye or whatever. He chose to say that we trained hard, we did more physical work, and maybe we flat, and we got to look at our program. I think we got to look at our fitness program, and it's great to hear a coach talk about it. But again, it goes back to George's comments right at the beginning of the season. Is we had a review. What was reviewed, and it goes back a little bit to the previous question, is the mental resilience. I agree with that. Like we've got, really the evidence is pretty clear. We've bottled it a few times, haven't we? Where's this 360 degrees or whatever it is? What's leading teams? Is it? Are they at the club or are they not at the club? If so, I want my subscription from leading teams back, because, I'm not banging down their door for a PowerPoint presentation, but given the evidence before us. So, interesting comments I thought from Goody.
All right. Let's move on. Maxi says a fellow Demonlander posted Wheelo's ratings for kicking efficiency of the 183 midfielders / mid forwards in the comp, which has Oliver ranked at 142, Viney at 169, and Track at 176. This is not just a statistic, but a clear observation when I attend games. Question 1. Am I being melodramatic, or is it now at the stage where it is costing us games? I get that the players are often under pressure, but so many kicks do not hit targets. Question 2. These three have been 10 years in the system, how can the atrocious disposal be possibly fixed, or is it an immensely frustrating rinse and repeat for the remainder of the season? Thanks for the potty, guys. So George, we've discussed this ad nauseum on these podcasts and even tonight about these three fellows. Some of our best players are our biggest butchers of the ball.
Yeah, you don't need to go to the statistics to know that, and the sad reality is it's always been the case. Track and Oliver and Viney are not good kicks, and neither is Max. And there's our four best players, and best midfielders, and have been the reason. I think the other thing that has exacerbated it more so in the last couple of years is when you look back at the 2021 Premiership. These poor kicks were still poor kicks, but they were kicking to players who were leading. We had Ben Brown, who's over 2 metres tall, as a not only a good marking target, but he knew how to lead. He'd always lead into space, and then when he got the ball, he was bloody efficient at kicking the goals. He didn't. You could almost be certain that it was going straight through the middle. The other person we had up forward was Tommy Mack, who was strong again, not a great lead as such, but he was accurate at kicking the goals. And what have we got today? We've got a couple of kids, 20 and 21 or whatever. Fritsch is playing as one of the primaries up forward alongside Melcham, who's, can barely get up a run. But he's not leading. He's not a leading forward. He's one who plays out the back or goes man on man. So in 2021, the bad kicks were covered by players who were more than capable and leading. We haven't got those players anymore, and
the game plan, George, it was less reliant on good kicking, wasn't it?
Yeah, we've just been exposed. It's just shown up how poor these kicks are, who've never been good kicks in the first place. So the answer is, as who was it said, Maxi. Yes, it is costing us games today.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly right. I mean, so just take Track. If in a game plan that's built around territory, like we were in 21 through to 24, he can bomb at 60 metres. It's a bit neither here nor there as long as we can bring it to ground, which we did. Brown and those players, and then we can go to walk up forward. That was essentially our method. But now he has to hit a target or kick to advantage, and he's just not doing it. And I think he's really dropped off. He's kicking this year. There was a discussion about this very topic on Demonland today that I was involved in, and someone posted what's an 11 that he's scoring. Percentage of his disposals that were score involvements was 35% in 21-22. It's now down to 30. And that's partly, I think, because of how, partly because I think he's dropped off in his skills. And as I said, evidenced by, those woeful inside kick, retention rates that he does, which is why, I'd be putting him deeper forward. I guess that doesn't help with his accuracy, but and Clary's the other one. Like Clary is a perfect example of what you're saying, George, because he could kick 60 metres, but he's not handballing as incisively at the moment. So if you can kick 60 and dump it in and win that next contest, bring it to ground with the players you mentioned, Benny Brown and probably Jackson as, being big ones there.
And T-Mac.
That's okay. And T-Mac, that's okay. But it's not okay when you need him to hit a one across the line like Jeff White was talking about and, be incisive. So, it's definitely costing us games.
The other thing that was interesting was Alistair Lynch on the commentary, who noted that our forwards were running backwards all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I noticed that at the game, and someone in front of me kept saying it too.
Which is funny. Like watching live. Where was Jefferson playing? He seemed to be centre forward almost.
Oh, yeah. He was. on McAndrew, or McAndrew was on him, but I don't think he's
But
not.
also Melksham was on McAndrew too.
Yeah, Melksham was mostly on McAndrew, but
the thing was, Lynch pointed out, these guys aren't leading. They're not running at the player. So when you've got someone like a Petrarca or an Oliver or a Viney or a Max with the ball in their hand, they've got no one to kick to in the first place.
I wonder, George, whether it's a bit of chicken and egg, though, because if you're a forward and you've got Petrarca coming at you and you know it's not in his football DNA to hit you up with a lace on the chest, you know that instinctively he's just going to bomb it long. What do you do if you want to get the ball?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, one or the other.
There was an example. I think maybe Lynch was the one who said it, but he said, well, why didn't that player do what do they call it, tick up lead, go back and then roll back up and offer up, and he just didn't, and I noticed that in the Casey game as well.
Very frustrating. Well, that's the end of our questions, but B-Man, you mentioned early on that you thought there was a question about Colt, and I don't think there was, unless there was one. But if you want to talk about Colt, is there anything you wanted to say?
No, maybe I was flicking on Demonland.
There is a thread about
the thread called. There's a question about Colt. Maybe that's where it's stuck in my mind. I look here. I think that Colt's. That was his best game player rating wise. It was interesting. That might be one of those examples where the problems people have with the player rating system might come to the fore a little bit. But he was involved in a lot of sort of good bits of play and ball movement, and he's an excellent kick. Made a terrible decision though. Having said that, in that first quarter, that kick across to, was it Salem, that got intercepted? It was like, I could have seen that from I could see it from down in Victoria, that ball was going to get taken off. It was going to get intercepted. But, it goes back to the question earlier. I think we do. George is right. We don't have much choice but to play the kids at the moment. It's really bad timing, those two concussions. And, geez, I hate to see concussions these days. Really, it's really upsetting to see. We had another player, McGovern, retire a couple of weeks back. That's starting to add up, aren't they? The number of AFL footballers retiring because of concussion. And he looked in a bad way, Petty, didn't he?
Yeah.
Got him right in the crown of the head.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Oliver didn't go off with concussion as well. He copped a big hit.
Yeah. He had a fair bit of claret.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, so like that, I mean, it's losing Howes, and I didn't even see that in. So what happened? I
didn't even know. All of a sudden, Petty went off, and then they said, then I realised that Sharp was on the ground, and I had a look on the AFL app and saw, he was subbed off for Blake Howes. That's the first I realised that Howes wasn't on the ground anymore.
It's a a couple of bad timing for the young, like AJ getting, I guess that was his fault for getting, and then what's his injury now? AJ's injury?
A calf or something.
Yeah, Seston injured when there's probably a chance for him playing ones, and Howes gets his shot, and at least out for at least one match.
Yep. All right, let's get into the Casey game. The Casey Demons' 4-game winning streak came to an abrupt halt in Queensland, falling 9 points short to the Gold Coast Suns in a disappointing yet spirited encounter at People First Stadium. Casey, boasting 17 AFL-listed players and riding high on recent form, looked primed to overwhelm the Suns early, jumping out of the gates with 2 quick goals from Tom Fullerton. For the first 20 minutes, the Demons were dominant, playing with flair and confidence, but their early swagger soon turned into sloppiness as Gold Coast responded with greater hunger and work rate, flipping the game on its head by quarter time and never surrendering the lead again. From that point on, Casey spent most of the day chasing the Suns side that simply wanted it more. The hosts controlled the second and third quarters, building a 23-point lead at the final break, while the Demons mounted a brave comeback in the last term with Jack Billings and Luca Kempfield both sparking hope with back-to-back goals. It proved too little, too late, as wasted opportunities in the dying minutes sealed their fate. Jack Billings was a clear standout for Casey, finishing with 23 disposals and 3 goals, including 2 clutch majors in the last quarter. I don't know if the clutch... if you don't win the game. Kempfield also impressed in his return to the forward line, matching Billings' 3 goals and showing promise as a marking target after spending the early part of the year in defence. Mitch Hardy, 32 disposals, 6 tackles and 1 goal, and Riley Bonner, 34 disposals, 12 marks. Continue their superb VFL form, acting as steadying influences throughout. And Jai Cully had an impact with 17 disposals, 8 tackles and a late goal, while the returning Jacob Van Rooyen produced a moment of brilliance in the second quarter with a strong one-on-one win and a running goal. First-year draftee Caleb Windsor and Ricky Menther both showed flashes of excitement. Windsor collecting 17 disposals and 6 marks in his VFL debut. I don't know if you can call it a debut when you get dropped. Providing speed and line-breaking runs.
It's the first game in the VFL he's played. That's a debut. Maybe it's a debut.
While Menther looked lively early and continued his growth with his trademark burst and 17 touches. After being dropped to Casey, Jake Lever took a match-high 13 marks, though the backline as a whole struggled to contain a well-organised but inexperienced Suns forward group. Small forward Jack Henderson worked tirelessly, laying 9 tackles and gathering 19 disposals. One of the game's more curious storylines was the limited use of developing ruck Will Varell, who had shown form leading into the bye but spent much of the match on the sidelines. Post-game, he appeared to be receiving attention from training staff, raising questions about a potential niggle or injury. Ultimately, Casey's depth and talent on paper weren't enough to overcome a hungrier Suns outfit. It's a wake-up call for a team that looked to be building towards a finals tilt. With the return to Casey Fields on the horizon next Sunday against Coburg, coinciding with the AFL side clash in Adelaide, the Demons must respond with intensity and cohesion if they had to reignite their VFL campaign. And it sounds like you boys both watched the game. Any observations from you?
The difference was the kicking skill in that game. I thought they just were incisive with their kicking and we missed a lot of targets. And Bonner, for every one nice kick he hits another 4 shockers. But, I'm surprised. Maybe I underrated Lever's game. Maybe I'm judging him too highly. 13 marks. But early on in the game, he tried a double balk and got tackled in the goal square, or just on the top of the goal square to concede a goal. That was not a good look, was it, George?
No, I think while he took 13 marks, sitting in the back line, the problem was he was just sitting in the back line. There was no drive coming from him. There was no run. That was a good example when he got caught. It's because he's got no movement.
Yeah, he's losing pace.
His ankle or foot injury that he's had, he's just got no acceleration, no sideways movement. And the thing that Jake Lever has always been good at is that third man in, jump and punch. That just wasn't evident in this game. Not at all.
It's interesting though, George, that role seems to be less the game swung away from it a little bit. There seems to be a lot more one-on-ones now, that third man in. I mean, all teams are putting a lot of time in at both VFL and AFL level at basically taking those sort of players out of the game to an extent. I totally agree. His lack of pace is a real concern, and ditto for Steve May, I have to say.
Yeah, and what I particularly found disappointing was people like Mitch Hardy and Riley Bonner were easily the best ones on the ground. And they're the Casey players. We had 17 AFL listed players, and they get shown up like this. Like what I saw of Ricky Menther, he's just getting better and better, and he's getting confidence about his own abilities.
And his lateral movement starting to show.
He looks like Cozzy when he does that, which is exactly the sort of player we need if we're playing Cozzy in the middle. Menther's really the player that we can put into the forward line who can provide that spark that we need
and leg speed.
And leg speed. Leg speed's important. Yeah.
Would you chuck him in the ones for a couple of games in the back end?
Why?
I wouldn't yet.
You don't want to kill him, but just as equally, we've got nothing to lose at this stage, have we?
He only kicked his first goal 2 weeks ago.
He's played four really good games now, and he was all at sea before that.
I 100% agree. You're totally spot on, George. That's the confidence. Like he's taking players on now, and we're getting a glimpse of what his real sort of raw talent is. He did a beautiful bit of play where he was involved in moving the ball down the ground. He just didn't finish it off. He ended up sort of in a tic-tac and with the ball in his hand and missed the shot. But, I really agree. I thought he's looking good, but I wouldn't be putting him in the ones just yet.
The other one who was starting to show something, and it's the same story almost as Menther, is Kent Field.
I was going to say the same thing, George.
They've put him up forward. Down the back line, he was completely lost up to a couple of weeks ago. They've put him up forward, and all of a sudden he's a brilliant mark.
He clunked one. He just absolutely, it was sticky hands out on the lead, but it was one of those old style like Dunstall leads where it just stuck. He's strong too, isn't he?
Yeah, he's strong, and he kicks goals. He's kicked 3 goals in this game. Real sharp contrast with Fullerton, who kicked 2 goals, I think, in about the first 2 minutes, and it was unsighted for the rest of the game. Just completely unsighted. So
on that, I would be happy. He's ahead of the curve. It would be ahead of the curve, but I would not be adverse for them to be putting Canfield in the ones.
Yeah,
exactly as you said, George, because he competes and he's strong. And I just have a feeling he may not have the tank yet because he's coming back from that. But he's the sort of player. I just have a feeling he might be the sort of player that improves once he gets up a level.
Yeah, the other one who put in the whole game, of course, was Laurie. But he's playing in the midfield, and who do you replace in the first if you go to put Laurie in?
My thing with Laurie is I think he's a very, very, very good VFL player, and just doesn't make that step up to AFL player. But he's never really been given any chance anyway.
And the other 2 children that we've got in Woden and Brown are in the same boat.
Exactly.
They're
Brown's
good
lets him down, and
they're good VFL players. They're playing in the midfield. They're not going to be replacing a Pataraka or Oliver. They're just going in circles, these players. But a little bit from Menther, a little bit from Kentfield. Somebody made the comment, and I think it's pretty close to it. Unfortunately, T-Mac looks like he cleaned out his locker this week.
Yeah, I saw that.
But T-Mac's probably the player we need this week because with Howes out, and we'll talk about it, Lever doesn't look anywhere close to coming back. Who else do we have? Adams doesn't look...
this was a big game. This was an opportunity for Adams to... He put together 3-4 good games in a row, but he was unsighted in this game.
Yeah. And as Andy pointed in the preview, I don't know what was going on with Ferrell.
Maybe he wasn't feral enough.
It had to be a niggle because you're not going to keep him off.
Yeah, but they certainly didn't. But they played him for 10 minutes, and I think it was in the second quarter. You go, what's he been doing in the first quarter? What's he been doing in the third quarter? I don't know what's going on. So
maybe came into the game with a niggle they thought they could play, and then he started playing, and he's like, "It's not working. I've got to. I'm sore."
Anyhow, So that was Casey. Disappointing again because I think Gold Coast had only won 2 games up to this one.
Oh, really? Because they were used to be a good team.
Well, their kicking was noticeably better than ours. The other player, I guess he's also coming back from an injury, but Muddy Hoare didn't really have much influence either.
Someone said he might have also got injured. Someone, I thought I read that somewhere.
And I have to agree. I've absolutely not gone off JVR, but geez, he looks out of form completely, doesn't he? And he just didn't impact the game in any meaningful way. He just looked like he didn't seem to know how to put himself into the game, apart from a couple of bits of play. The one that you mentioned was a nice bit of play, but he just didn't seem to have the sort of presence that he did even in the first season at VFL.
So what's going on there? Because this is a guy who we thought, he's going to be the next thing.
Well, it's not.
And he can't even do it in the twos.
Well,
you'd expect him to be
every
tearing
big
it
player
up.
goes through it. Cadman now coming good in his 50th game. It's up around that magic 50. I know JVR's got there. Tracy's everyone loves Tracy, but he went through. I talked about this a few weeks ago. Every 12 forward goes through troughs. It's just the way it is, and he'll come out the other side. But I'm really to agree with George. Is he needs to not be the number one forward for a while. He needs another big tall up there, and like a Kenfield, for instance. I know that's a bit rough. Kenfield hasn't played a game of AFL footy, but to push Maxi forward and maybe that means biting the bullet a little bit and bringing in a Campbell, for instance, and doing something like that so you can push Maxi forward. But I just think that he can't, he's doing too much wrestling and he's not strong enough yet to play that role. He'll get there in 2-3 years' time. He'll be a monster. I think it's just a patience game. But We've had a lot of players drop off, haven't we? McVie as well, Windsor. We haven't spoken about the fact that Windsor got dropped and, and he, I have to say, whilst I think, what'd you say, he got 17 disposals?
Yeah, 17.
Yeah, he had some pretty average kicks amongst that lot too. So a good run and carry though, and that's what, so we get Ingrid Bergman into the side and we put him back on the wing and Lindsay on the other and Bob's your uncle. We're away to the races.
All right, let's get into changes. The Demons will be forced to make at least 2 changes this week with both Blake Howes and Harrison Petty sustaining concussion injuries in the match against the Suns. This may open the door for Jacob Van Rooyen and Jake Lever or T-Mac to return to the senior side after being dropped last week. B-Man followed by George. Your changes for this week's match against the Crows in Adelaide.
I think, as George said, is that JVR's got to almost by default have to come in for Petty, unless they do something, bring Kentfield in. I can't see that. I can't see them bringing Lever back in, not on that performance. Maybe I'm a hard marker. I'm surprised he took 13 marks, but I think George is,
Crows have a big forward line. Got a couple of big units down there. Walker, Tilthorpe.
That makes it. I'd bring T-Mac ahead of because Lever's
we're
not
going to
great
need big
one-on-one.
bodies. But we're going to need
T-Mac then.
Yeah.
So T-Mac
is that enough?
Well, you can't. How many do you want to bring in?
I guess you can't have four big men because you got Turner, May, and T-Mac or Lever.
Yeah. Look. I think that JVR's an obvious one. So they'll probably, they'll bring JVR in and, they're not going to bring Menther in, I don't think, George, do you?
No.
I can't think of anyone else.
George, the
only one I'd really like them to bring Tom Campbell in just to give some relief so that we don't have to throw JVR into the ruck again or Jeffo into the ruck as we did this week. We don't need Sharp in the side. He provided nothing for us.
So Windsor back this week?
Probably Windsor. Yeah, Windsor got enough of the ball to make a case. That's one of the problems of dropping someone to get form in the VFL because if they don't do anything. So, I reckon Windsor, it would be good to have him back in the side for sure. Is Spargo a chance of being fit?
No, I think he was 6 weeks.
Last week he was once listed as 1 to 2 weeks on the injury list, so I don't know where.
Right, and where's Seston at? What was the?
I think the 1 to 2 weeks from last week was the closest anyone on that injury list was.
Yeah, look, I'd be bringing Windsor back in as well. I was pretty surprised they dropped him, but although. Not shocked because his form is.
He just looks tired.
He just looks tired. Yeah. So does Lang. You said that last week or the week before, and Langford looks a bit tired too. Still, maybe it was this infamous big heavy session that they did. They just flattened all the players. Good move that.
Let's get into the preview of the match. The Demons hit the road for the 3rd time in 4 weeks. A tough stretch that's included the mid-season bye. As they prepare to face a red-hot Adelaide side, the Crows are soaring, having won 4 of their last 5 games and sitting 3rd on the ladder with an impressive percentage. With finals hopes all but extinguished, they are extinguished. Melbourne faces a daunting challenge against a team in form and on their home deck. So George, followed by B-Man, your preview of this match this week.
Yeah, it's hard to see us taking on the Crows the way they're playing. They look fit. They've got the players on the field that they want. Their forward line is pretty impressive. We're going to struggle with the back line. We're going to struggle even more with the injuries that we've got to critical areas. We've got a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old holding up the forward line. Thank goodness for Cozzy and a 34-year-old Melcham holding us together this week. But I don't know that they're going to be able to repeat the same sort of dose. So, can't really see us getting even close to Adelaide.
The betting's $4 for an Adelaide win. It's based on your assessment there, George, that's good value. It's like good value for the Crows. We should be about $6 by that. Yeah, I mean, the Crows are interesting, isn't it? They've got the Burgess shine on them. Like, they look super fit. Just looking at some of their sort of rankings, they've got some pretty impressive numbers. One thing that's positive for us is that they're ranked number 1 in clangers per game, but I think that's probably less a function of their average kick, more of a function of their attacking, the way they attack. They're first, second in goal assists per game, 4th in inside 50s, 4th in tackles per game. So, similar the way, when Melbourne were at our best under Goody, we tackled hard, ran hard, ran through the line. They certainly, an exciting team to watch. They're really up and about. The players that they're top their charts in terms of their stat leaders, Dawson, who I underrate, but he's a gun, isn't he? He's Matt Crouch is averaging 7. He is it, or I think of his brother, but Matt Crouch seems to have turned his career around. He's averaging nearly 18 handballs a game, but Dawson's the one that seems to be really key to their game. It's going to be hard to it's hard to see us winning, but we love Adelaide Oval, and I've not got much more than that.
We didn't love it a couple of weeks ago before the bye.
No, we didn't love it a couple of weeks ago. So, I wonder what our week on the track will be like.
I don't know.
The bottom line for any game now, though, is that it's about, like I said, and why we lost, is we're in the game if we can bring 200 pressure for the game. Any team is, basically. If they drop off even a little bit, that every team's in the game. We saw that with, who did North beat a couple of weeks back? It was all about the pressure they applied.
Carlton.
Sorry?
Carlton,
yeah. That's right, Carlton. So thank God for Carlton. I think the problem, though, for us, I think, really, is apart from all of those things, is that their leg speed is really impressive as well. They've got a lot of dynamic runners. So, it'll be interesting to see what approach we take. It'll be interesting. I'll be really curious to see where they play Viney, whether they go back to drawing him up forward or he goes into the midfield. I agree with the idea of giving JVR and Jefferson a good solid run in the ones. There's nothing to be lost now in bouncing them back and forward. I'd bring Windsor back because we'll need his leg speed. I really think that that's going to be a factor. And it's a pity Howes is injured, because you could almost look at bringing Langford into the centre and him being replaced on the wing by Windsor. It'll be an interesting watch.
All right, well, it's going to be a sunny afternoon after it's going to rain in the morning over there, but it's only going to be 14 degrees, so bring a jacket if you're heading down there. And I think that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. We'll be back next week to break down our round 17 match against the Crows. If you want to listen to the show live as it happens, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8 p.m. after the Crows game. And thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. That was thank you to Not a Cat Lady. As always, your questions and comments are an integral part of this show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to El Diablo 14, Fab Demon, Doug Reamer, Lazy, Spirit of Norm Smith, Big Gun, Rostar, Wells 11, Despicable Me, Buck Naked, Demon Cat, Howard Grimes, Maxi, Red and Bluebeard, and Kev. And thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman. And thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read it and give you a shout-out on the next show. Go Demons.
The Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons.